You've been told the story wrong. Not slightly wrong, not missing a few details. Fundamentally, structurally, deliberately wrong, shaped by centuries of mythology, royal propaganda, and the simple human need to make death feel cleaner than it actually is. The ancient Egyptians were obsessed with death. More than any civilization before or after them, they built entire systems around it. Rituals, tombs, gods, spells, entire libraries of instruction on how to die correctly. And yet, the deaths of their most powerful figures, the pharaohs, the generals, the queens who bent empires, almost none of them ended the way history taught you. Some died in ways so embarrassing their successors spent decades erasing the evidence. Some died in ways so violent the bodies were hidden, destroyed, or deliberately misidentified. Some didn't die when their official records claimed they did, and some deaths that have been romanticized for thousands of years. When you look at the actual physical evidence, the mummies, the skulls, the DNA, the wounds that still haven't fully healed, the real story is far darker, far stranger, and in some cases, far more human than anything carved into temple walls. This is not mythology. This is not legend dressed up as history. This is what the bones actually say. Imagine you are standing inside a room with no windows, no sound from outside, no way to know what time it is or what season. The walls are covered floor to ceiling in images. Gods with animal heads, boats crossing dark water, scales weighing hearts against feathers. Every surface is a story, and every story has been approved, reviewed, officially sanctioned. This is the world that Egypt's rulers built around death, not just to honor the dead, but to control what the living would believe about them. And the first thing you need to understand before any name, before any date, is this. In ancient Egypt, the official version of a death was almost never the complete version. The Egyptians didn't just bury their dead, they edited them. When a pharaoh died in a way that threatened the narrative of divine power, through illness, through madness, through assassination, through defeat, their successors had both the motive and the tools to rewrite it. Temple inscriptions could be chiseled away, names could be removed from cartouches, entire reigns could be compressed into a single line or omitted entirely. The ancient historian Manetho, writing in the 3rd century BCE, just compiled a list of Egypt's rulers that scholars still use today as a foundational document. And yet, Manetho's list contains gaps so large you could fit entire dynasties inside them. Not because those rulers didn't exist, but because someone at some point decided they shouldn't. This is the world we're entering, and it is full of people who did not die the way you were told. You know the name. You've seen the mask, the golden face of a boy pharaoh, young, serene, eternal. The discovery of his tomb in 1922 was one of the most extraordinary archaeological events in modern history, and the story that crystallized around him was almost perfect in its tragedy. A young king, dead at 19, cause unknown, buried in a modest tomb that wasn't even originally meant for him. For decades, the dominant theory was murder. The evidence seemed compelling. His skull showed what appeared to be a bone fragment that could indicate a blow to the head. His advisor Ai, who became pharaoh immediately after Tutankhamun's death, suddenly gained enormous power. His general Horemheb, who came after Ai, systematically erased Tutankhamun's name from monuments across Egypt. If you wanted to construct a murder, you had suspects, motive, and opportunity laid out with almost suspicious neatness. But here is what the bones actually say. In 2010, a series of DNA analyses and CT scans performed on Tutankhamun's mummy revealed something far more complicated than a blow to the head. His body carried multiple malaria infections, not one but several strains simultaneously. His left foot showed severe bone deformity, a condition now identified as Keuler disease, which would have made walking genuinely painful and potentially required a cane. Scans found over 130 walking sticks in his tomb. His parents were almost certainly siblings, a practice common in the royal line, but one that generated severe genetic consequences across generations. The bone fragment in his skull? Later analysis suggested it likely came loose after death, during the mummification process, or in the 3,000 years since burial. Tutankhamun was not murdered. He was a physically compromised young man, riddled with genetic disease, in chronic pain, struck by multiple infections, and he died the way many fragile people in the ancient world died. Quietly, probably in a bed. Probably before anyone fully understood how serious it had become. The murder narrative was more compelling. The murder narrative spread further. But the real death of Tutankhamun is actually sadder. A body that was never particularly strong, in a world that had no antibiotics, no surgery, no way to stop what was already happening inside him. He was 19 years old. He never had a choice. Now we come to the one that actually was murder. Ramesses III ruled Egypt for over 30 years. He was the last of the great warrior pharaohs, the man who repelled the Sea Peoples, one of the most destructive migrations in ancient history, and kept Egypt intact when every neighboring civilization was collapsing. His official death? Dignified, natural. A pharaoh who completed his reign and passed into the realm of the gods. But in 2012, CT scans of his mummy revealed something that no official inscription had ever recorded. His throat had been cut. Not metaphorically, not symbolically. A deep incision across the front of the neck, severing the trachea and major blood vessels with such force that the cut reached down to the vertebrae. The wound had been packed with linen during mummification, deliberately concealed. But under modern scanning technology, it was impossible to hide. Ramesses III had been assassinated. The conspirators were known. The records that survived, a set of legal papyri known as the Turin Judicial Papyrus, describe a harem conspiracy involving one of his secondary wives, a woman named Tai, who wanted to place her own son Pentawere on the throne. Dozens of conspirators were identified, tried, and executed. Some were forced to commit suicide. Others had their noses and ears cut off. What the official records never said, what was smoothed over and carefully omitted, was whether the conspiracy had actually succeeded. It had. Ramesses III died. His chosen successor, Ramesses IV, took the throne, but the man who had held Egypt together against the Sea Peoples had his throat cut by people who slept inside his own palace, who ate the food from his own kitchens, who knew exactly where he would be and when he would be alone. The wound was covered with linen. The records were adjusted, and for 3,000 years no one knew. She was one of the most successful rulers in Egyptian history. 20 years of prosperous, peaceful reign, massive building projects, successful trade expeditions to the land of Punt. A woman who not only ruled Egypt but ruled it well, and whose image, the false beard, the pharaoh's crown, and the male pronouns carved into temple walls, was one of the most deliberate and sustained acts of royal self-presentation in the ancient world. And then she vanished from history entirely. Not immediately, but within decades of her death, her successor, Thutmose III, her stepson, began systematically removing her image from monuments. Her face was chiseled away. Her cartouches were filled in. Her statues were buried in pits. The official record was rewritten so thoroughly that for centuries, Egyptologists reading the inscriptions didn't realize two people had been co-ruling. They thought Thutmose III had simply reigned for a very long time. For a long time, scholars assumed Hatshepsut had been murdered, that Thutmose III, resentful of decades spent in her shadow, had finally struck. But the erasure happened 20 years after her death. And when her mummy was identified in 2007, through an extraordinary piece of forensic work matching a loose tooth to a wooden box bearing her name, the body told a different story. She died in her 50s. She had severe dental disease. She likely had bone cancer and diabetes. Her skin showed signs of a condition she may have been self-treating with a lotion that, ironically, was carcinogenic. Hatshepsut didn't die at the hands of her stepson. She died of the accumulated weight of age and illness in a body that had been slowly failing. The erasure that came after wasn't about revenge. Most scholars now believe it was political. Thutmose III removing a precedent that threatened the principle of male succession, protecting his own son's claim to the throne. Or he didn't erase her because he hated her. He erased her because she was too powerful to leave as an example. No death certificate, no confirmed burial, no mummy with his name on it that has been accepted by the full scholarly community. A reign that ended. And a body that 3,000 years later has still not been conclusively found. Akhenaten is the pharaoh who broke Egypt's religion. For centuries, Egypt had worshipped a vast pantheon. Amun, Ra, Osiris, Isis, Horus, Set, hundreds of gods with complex relationships and entire priesthoods devoted to their maintenance. Then around 1346 BCE, Akhenaten declared that there was only one god, the Aten, the solar disk, and that he himself was the sole intermediary between humanity and the divine. He closed temples. He redirected tax revenues. And he moved the capital to a new city, Amarna, built from nothing in the desert. He changed art styles, changed language, changed the fundamental spiritual architecture of the most powerful civilization in the world. And then, after 17 years, he was simply gone. The official record gives him a death, but no tomb has been found containing him with certainty. A mummy discovered in a tomb designated KV55 in the Valley of the Kings is the most likely candidate, showing a male individual of roughly the right age with physical features consistent with royal bloodlines. DNA analysis suggests a close relationship to Tutankhamun, supporting the theory that Akhenaten was the boy king's father. But the body in KV55 was found in conditions suggesting deliberate desecration. The face had been destroyed. The cartouches had been removed from the coffin. The body had been left in a state that, in Egyptian belief, would damage the soul's ability to pass into the afterlife. Someone had tried not just to erase Akhenaten, someone had tried to destroy him in death as completely as he had been dismantled in life. Whether that was murder or simply the posthumous revenge of a priesthood he had dismantled and humiliated is a question that may never be fully answered. What is certain is that his city was abandoned. His god was suppressed. His name was removed from king lists, and his body, if it was ever in that tomb, was left in pieces that still haven't all been identified. She is arguably the most recognizable face from ancient Egypt. The painted limestone bust discovered in 1912, now in the Neues Museum in Berlin, has been reproduced so many times it has become almost abstract. A symbol, an icon. But Nefertiti herself, the real woman behind the image, disappeared from Egyptian records around year 12 of Akhenaten's reign, 5 years before his own death. No record of her death, no tomb identified beyond debate, no clear explanation for the disappearance. Theories range from natural death to a political shift in power to the extraordinary and still contested possibility that Nefertiti did not disappear at all, but changed her name and continued to rule, either as a co-regent or as the mysterious pharaoh Nefertiti, who appears in records in the years following her disappearance. In 2015, the British Egyptologist Nicholas Reeves proposed, based on infrared scanning of Tutankhamun's burial chamber, that there might be hidden rooms behind the decorated walls, potentially containing Nefertiti's undisturbed burial. Subsequent radar surveys produced ambiguous results. No hidden chamber has been confirmed, but the possibility has never been entirely ruled out. Nefertiti may be lying a few meters away from the boy king whose own death you have just heard reconstructed, or she may be somewhere else entirely, buried under a name that isn't hers, in a tomb that hasn't been opened, in a desert that still holds its secrets with extraordinary patience. The bones talk, the records lie, and somewhere beneath 3,000 years of sand and silence, the real stories of these people are still waiting to be read. The image is perfect, as too perfect. A queen of extraordinary intelligence, fluent in 9 languages, the first ruler of her dynasty to actually speak Egyptian, a political strategist who aligned herself with the two most powerful men in the Roman world, reduced in the end to a romantic gesture. A snake pressed to her breast, a death that felt like poetry. But here is the problem. Ancient sources contradict each other almost immediately on the method. Plutarch, writing over a century after her death, admits no one actually knew how she died. 2 small puncture marks were reportedly found on her arm, not her chest. The asp, the Egyptian cobra, is a slow killer. A death by cobra bite in a sealed chamber, discovered quickly enough for her body to appear composed, does not align well with the biology. The modern toxicologists have proposed a more plausible alternative, a cocktail of opium, hemlock, and wolfsbane, substances that would produce rapid unconsciousness followed by respiratory failure, leaving the body calm and the face unmarked. A death that looked like sleep. A death that looked chosen. Cleopatra was a scholar. She had access to the greatest library in the ancient world. She knew pharmacology better than almost anyone alive. If she chose her death, and everything about her character suggests she would have, she almost certainly chose it with precision, not with a theatrical snake pulled from a basket of figs. The snake was a better story, so the snake survived. His mummy is one of the most violent objects in any museum collection. Seqenenre Tao, pharaoh of the 17th dynasty, had died in battle, or something very close to it. His skull carries at least 5 separate wounds, axe blows, dagger penetrations, a spear thrust. When his mummy was first unwrapped in the 19th century, scholars could see immediately that this man had not died peacefully. But recent CT scans added something new. The wounds were inflicted by multiple different weapons that matched Hyksos military equipment, the foreign dynasty occupying northern Egypt at the time. And crucially, some wounds showed early bone healing, suggesting he had survived at least one earlier assault before the final one. The 2021 analysis proposed something remarkable. Seqenenre Tao may have died not on an open battlefield, but in a formal execution. Hands possibly bound, surrounded by enemies, or struck from multiple sides simultaneously by soldiers with different weapons. He wasn't just a king who died in war. He may have been a king who was captured and then killed in a way designed to be humiliating, and whose embalmers, working with a body that had deteriorated before reaching them, did what they could with what remained. The mummy's face is still frozen in what looks like a grimace. 3,500 years later, you can still see it. He lived to approximately 90 years old. For an ancient Egyptian, for anyone in the ancient world, that was not a life. That was a geological event. Ramesses II is celebrated as perhaps the greatest of all pharaohs, the builder of Abu Simbel, the signatory of the first recorded peace treaty in history. I'm the man whose face appears on more monuments than any other ruler Egypt ever produced. His death is recorded as peaceful, natural, the closing of an extraordinarily long reign. And technically, that's true, but the mummy tells a supplementary story. His body shows severe arthritis throughout the spine. By the end of his life, he would have been significantly hunched, in chronic pain, unable to move without difficulty. His teeth were so badly worn and infected that abscesses had spread into his jaw. Dental disease of that severity causes a particular kind of constant radiating pain that has no relief. He also suffered from atherosclerosis, hardening of the arteries, which would have affected circulation and cognitive function. The man who had conquered armies, built monuments that still stand, and outlived 12 of his own sons, died slowly, in pain, in a body that had been used for 9 decades and had nothing left to give. His hair, preserved in the mummy, was red, dyed with henna in his old age, which some scholars read as vanity, and others read as a man who refused, even at 90, to look like he was finished. He was not Egyptian, but he died as Egypt's pharaoh, and his death, the death of Alexander the Great in Babylon in 323 BCE, sent a shockwave through Egypt that restructured the entire civilization. The official narrative: fever. A king who drank heavily at a banquet, fell ill, and deteriorated over 12 days before dying at 32. Modern medical analyses have proposed typhoid fever complicated by bowel perforation, and others have suggested Guillain-Barré syndrome, a neurological condition that can cause progressive paralysis while leaving the patient mentally alert, which would explain the most disturbing detail in ancient accounts. Reports that Alexander's body showed no signs of decomposition for 6 days after his apparent death. 6 days with no decomposition in the Babylonian heat. Some researchers have proposed he wasn't dead, that he was paralyzed, aware, and buried, or nearly buried, alive. It cannot be confirmed. It cannot be ruled out. What can be confirmed is that his body was fought over by his generals for 2 years after his death, that it was eventually brought to Egypt and entombed in Alexandria, and that the location of his tomb, one of the most searched for sites in all of archaeology, has been lost entirely. And Alexander the Great conquered the known world, became a god in Egypt, and then disappeared from it completely, in a grave that 300 years of searching has not found. Not every figure who shaped ancient Egypt left a name that survived. The mummy known as the Younger Lady, found in Tomb K535, identified through DNA as the mother of Tutankhamun, was found with her face violently destroyed, her chest caved in, her left arm torn from her body. This was not mummification damage. This was deliberate desecration, carried out with force, almost certainly while the body was still wrapped. She was someone important enough to be buried in the Valley of the Kings. Someone important enough that her identity had to be destroyed. We still don't know exactly who she was. There are dozens of mummies like her, bodies in royal or noble contexts, with evidence of violent ends or deliberate obliteration, whose names have never been recovered. The Egyptians were meticulous record keepers, and yet these people were so thoroughly removed from their own history that even the physical evidence of their existence was nearly erased. The Younger Lady's destroyed face stares at nothing in a museum case. Somewhere in the record, the order to destroy it was given by someone whose name we probably know very well. Here is what 3,000 years of official record cannot change. The bodies remain. Long after the inscriptions were chiseled away, long after the names were removed, long after the stories were rewritten into something cleaner and more politically convenient, the physical matter of these people endured. In the dry heat of the Valley of the Kings, or in sealed chambers cut from limestone, the evidence waited. And now, with CT scanners and DNA sequencing and forensic toxicology, we are finally in a position to hear what the bones have been saying for millennia. They say, we were not gods. We were not myths. We were people with bad teeth and broken spines and genetic diseases and enemies who slept in the next room. We built monuments that outlasted everything, our names, our children, our truth, and in the end, we died the way everyone dies. Badly. Incompletely. With things left unresolved. The Egyptians understood better than anyone that death was not an ending. It was a transition that required preparation, ritual, and the correct telling of a story. They prepared their dead with extraordinary care, and then they told the story wrong deliberately. Every single time it threatened something more important than the truth. What survives isn't the story they wanted told. What survives is the wound. And wounds, it turns out, don't lie. They built the greatest monuments in human history, and then spent centuries making sure you'd never know how they really died. The bones disagreed.